Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session of the Washington History Seminar, Historical Perspectives on International and National Affairs. This afternoon, we will focus on a new book by historian Marlene Daut, The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henri Christophe. We're also very fortunate to have with us two wonderful scholars who will act as commentators and provide some initial comments to launch our discussion. Laurent Dubois of the University of Virginia and Amy Wilentz from the University of California, Irvine. To all of you, a warm welcome. I think in Laurent's case, welcome back to the Washington History Seminar. I'm Christian Osterman. I direct the Wilson Center's History and Public Policy program, and I have the privilege to co-chair the seminar with Eric Arneson of the AHA and George Washington University. The Washington History Seminar is a collaborative effort of our two organizations, the American Historical Association and the Wilson Center's History and Public Policy program. Since 2010, the seminar served as a nonpartisan forum to discuss important new historical publications. Behind the scenes, Peter Bierstecker helps produce this event, so our thanks to Peter. And we'd also like to acknowledge our donors and obviously welcome your support. If you feel like it, you can join the ranks of our supporters, donors. How to do so is in the chat function or on our various websites. Join us next Monday for a discussion of Maurice Casey's book, Hotel Lux, An Intimate History of Communism's Forgotten Radicals. A couple of technical notes. Today's session will be recorded and will soon appear on our respective organizations' websites. For the Q&A part of the seminar, you have two options to you out there in the audience, in the Zoom world. You have two options to participate. Our preferred way for you to do so is to use the raise hand function in the Zoom functionality. If you'd like to ask a question, you press the button, you'll be queued, and then Eric, who will moderate today's session, will call on you. You'll receive a prompt. You have to unmute yourself, but then you actually should be able to put your question directly to our panelists. You can also use the Q&A function in Zoom, and if there's time, we will put those comments and questions to our presenters. I think that's it. Eric, over to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Christian, and welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our author this afternoon, Marlene Daut, who is professor of French and African diaspora studies at Yale University, where she teaches courses in anglophone and francophone, Caribbean, African American, and French colonial literary and historical studies. Primarily a literary and intellectual historian of the Caribbean, she writes about the history of the Haitian Revolution, literary cultures of the Greater Caribbean, and racial politics in global media, especially as it appears in film and television. Her books include Baron de Vastey and the Origins of Black Atlantic Humanism, published in 2017 by Palgrave Macmillan, Tropics of Haiti, Race in the Literary History of the Haitian Revolution and the Atlantic World, 1789-1865, published in 2015 by Liverpool University Press, and Awakening the Ashes, An Intellectual History of the Haitian Revolution, published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2013. A public scholar, her articles have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Nation, Essence, and Harper's Bazaar. And this afternoon, she is speaking on her new book, The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henri Christophe, published by Knopf some 2 weeks ago. Marlene, welcome to the Washington History Seminar.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm very delighted to be here. I was delighted to get the invitation, and thank you so much to Laurent and Amy as well for acting as conversation partners and respondents. So I've been given some instructions to provide a kind of general overview, a short, brief overview, and I'd like to do that through some images. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which is always the moment of truth. So here we go. Okay. Here we are. So what you're looking at here is a color version of an engraving that originally appeared in 1848 to illustrate the coronation of Henri Christophe as King Henry I, which took place on June 2nd, 1811. And so the question I get most often is, how did this happen? So I'll start at the beginning. Henri Christophe was born on the British island of Grenada in 1767. And I always like to begin there, which seems natural in some ways, but after you read the book, you'll see why potentially it's not. Because Christophe's place of birth is something that is contested. And the reason for that is he doesn't have a baptismal certificate that's come to light ever. His marriage certificate to his wife, where we would get precise information about his background, has not yet come to light. But as I set about looking for this quote unquote official documentation, I realized it was staring me right in the face. Those of you who know me know I have a website called lagazetteroyale.com, where I have collected all the known issues of King Henri Christophe's newspapers, the two different versions, the one published when he was president of Haiti and the one published when he became king. I've also collected there the 6 different versions of the Royal Almanac that were published from 1814 to 1820, and that list his birth date and tell the birth dates of his wife, his children, and also his marriage date. And Christophe also had a lot of ministers and secretaries working for him. And one of them, Baron de Vastey, he commissioned to write a history of the island. And so the first full-length history of the Haitian Revolution written by a Haitian is Baron de Vastey's essay on the causes of the Civil War, the revolutions and civil wars of Haiti, of course, originally published in French, but it did appear in English translation in 1823. And in that work, Baron de Vastey tells us, I'm taking up my subject. Henri is originally from the island of Grenada, and he is now 51 years old. And this, in effect, amounts to a sort of self-testimony, because these documents were printed by the royal press at the behest of the king. And in fact, Baron de Vastey had been named the official court historian. Something else that also hides in this document that was known and talked about, but again, we were going about looking for Christophe's official military service record, when again, the confirmation of this information was sort of staring at us. In that same work by Baron de Vastey in 1819, there is a footnote that tells us that the king served in the American Revolutionary War at the Battle of Savannah, where he was wounded. This is a project of the Haitian American Historical Society. They erected a monument to what were called the Chasseurs Volontaires, which was the group of men of color who fought in the American Revolutionary War in October 1779 at the Battle of Savannah. And it depicts Henri Christophe there zoomed in as the drummer boy because of his young age, since he was only 12 at the time of the battle. The base of the monument tells some more parts of the story, including providing a list of names of other individuals who fought in this battle as well. And that included André Rigaud, who is Christophe's and Toussaint Louverture's storied rival. And that information is also seconded by his military service record, which is in the Ministry of Defense in the French archives. So I'm fast forwarding here, but Christophe does participate in the Haitian Revolution, notably in June 1793, when Cap Français is burned down and nearly to the ground. But what he's most famous for in the Haitian Revolution is opposing the Leclerc expedition, which earned him the title from the French as the arsonist of Cap. So this is the moment when slavery has been abolished on the island formally from 1793 to 1802. Christophe has enjoyed an extraordinary rise, like many of the Black freedom fighters, Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines. They've become generals in the French army. But now Napoleon is in power in France, and he would like to pave the way to restore slavery. He would like to arrest Toussaint Louverture, pit the other generals against one another, and bring a massive amount of troops so that slavery can be reinstated. But he meets the obstacle of Henri Christophe, who gives his famous line, which is, "I have the honor of informing you that I cannot deliver these forts and posts over which I have been given command before having received an order from the Governor General Toussaint Louverture, from whom I derive my authority." He tells Leclerc, if you realize these threats to land your troops here in Cap Français, which Christophe had command over as Brigadier General, he said, I will resist as an officer general must, and you will only enter the city of Cap after having watched it be reduced to ashes. And even upon these ashes, I will fight you. So that's his famous line from the Haitian Revolution. And he, in fact, does order the city of Le Cap burned. So you're looking at a painting, a more contemporary painting of that event, and also the statue of Henri Christophe, which is on the Champ de Mars in Port-au-Prince in Haiti. This is a map of the earlier burning of Cap Français, but I just wanted to give you some sense of what happens during these fires. So the grayed out buildings are those that burned down. And it's relevant here because Christophe played a huge role in the reconstruction of the city after the 1793 fire. So it was really astonishing to many that he would order the city to be burned down. This is a map of some of that ongoing reconstruction, which is color-coded, that shows that, you know, he and Pierrot, who was an engineer, and General Vincent, who oversaw the project more generally, they were earnestly engaged in rebuilding the city. So it was quite remarkable when Christophe once more had it burned down. If we fast forward again, Christophe helps the freedom fighters achieve independence from France, formally declared on January 1st, 1804. And now 3 of the most important men in the now independent Haiti are Henri Christophe, whom Dessalines in the middle, who becomes Governor General at first, and then Emperor Jacques I of the island. He makes Christophe General-in-Chief of the Haitian Army. We also have Division General Alexandre Pétion, who's going to have command over the Western Division, and this is going to be very important because it will be in the South and West that the independent island will experience one of its first major problems, which is that on October 17th, 1806, Dessalines is assassinated by members of his own military from the West and South on the Pont Rouge, just outside Port-au-Prince. After this, Christophe has to decide what to do. And maybe Amy and Laurent will ask me a question about Christophe's role in this, since that also seems to be something on many people's minds. But let's just say that Christophe doesn't agree with the idea that Haiti should become a republic. And so he flees to the north, which leaves Alexandre Pétion in the south, where he becomes president of the Republic of Haiti. And Christophe at first takes the very modest title as he assumes command over northern Haiti, seated in the former Cap Français, now Cap Haïtien, soon to be Cap Henri. He takes the title of President and Generalissimo of the Forces of the Earth and Seas of the state of Haiti. So this is from 1807 to 1811. But in 1811, his counselors of state nominate him to become king. And in March 1811, he accepts the charge. And again, on June 2nd, he is crowned by a French priest from Brittany named Father Corneille Brel, who was one of his dear friends, even in the colonial era. And so I always say Christophe then became a king in a world of kings. So the first image you're looking at there is an Italian broadside that was actually meant to poke fun at the king. You see, he's dressed very ostentatiously. The far image is an image a painting that Christophe commissioned from the famous British painter, Richard Evans. There are at least 2 different versions of this painting, possibly 3. Christophe sent one of them to William Wilberforce, and that painting that he sent to William Wilberforce is the one that is in the Alfred de Moor Archive of Haitian History today at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. The middle image is Edouard Duval-Carrier's, the Haitian painter's imaginative recreation of the Italian broadside, as he's been doing some really marvelous work around the Kingdom of Haiti, but also iconography from the Caribbean, sort of reimagining the colonial era portraits. And so in this one, he takes up this mockery of Christophe and transforms it into something else. Christophe was famous for several things. One were his laws. He had a famous book of laws he issued in 1812 called the Code Henri, and he was trying to transform the plantation economy that had existed in the colonial era into one that would be driven by free hands, the euphemism they always use, and so no more slaves, but cultivateurs and cultivatrices. He also created a large nobility, which fascinated the world. You're looking at an 1811 recreation of that nobility that will also end up being printed in the kingdom, but gets immediate translation in Philadelphia as the world sort of puzzles over and is fascinated at the same time by Christophe's ascent to king. You're also looking at a Spanish translation of the laws of the Code Henri. So really the world was sort of watching to find out what was going to happen and was deeply interested in how this new society run by a Black king on the island of Haiti would function. Christophe was also known for his iconography. So in the Armorial of Haiti, which is today housed at the Royal College of Arms in London, we have the book there and all the coat of arms of his military and his nobility. And so this is Christophe's famous coat of arms, which says, "God is my cause and my sword." And it also has his motto there, which is a little hard to read, but "I am reborn from my ashes," of course, below the phoenix. This is repeated in the newspapers, and also you're also looking at a UNESCO commemorative coin to commemorate his reign. So it's been something that's really highly resonant and really associated with his rule, this phoenix and the lions. Christophe's kingdom was also a place where anti-colonial, anti-slavery, and anti-racist thought thrived. He directed his ministers to write anti-slavery pamphlets. He welcomed abolitionists into the fold. One of them is going to become the principal translator of Baron de Vastey's works. He will take the works back overseas, have them printed in London, and they will circulate all around abolitionist circles. Sometimes some of the men he tapped with these tasks would get into trouble, as did Thomas Strafford. One episode I tell in the book, got back to Kingston. He had a pamphlet of Baron de Vastey's. He was arrested. He was charged with sedition. The indictment was 37 pages because it contained the original French hand transcribed alongside the first English translations of that work that would go on to be formally translated later, plus the charge against Strafford, which was that he was attempting to aid Henri Christophe to bring anti-slavery and abolitionist ideas to Kingston. But probably most people who only encounter Christophe's story incidentally will more so recognize the famous Citadelle La Ferrière, called the Citadelle Henri in Christophe's day. It is the largest fortress in North America and was widely hailed as the eighth wonder of the world by those who visited it. But his court was also a place of opera and music, original scores, dancing, ballerinas. One of Dessalines' daughters was a ballerina at court. And so you're looking also there at Juste Chanlat's opera, the hunting party of the king there. The undercurrent to all of this magnificence, of course, which we'll get into today, is that alongside Christophe's legacy of being this visionary, he also has the reputation of being a tyrant, of working the Haitian people very, very hard to build his famous citadel, but also his famous palace at Sans-Souci, while he lived a life of opulence and wealth with many, many carriages that were often written about in the British newspaper. The dresses of his daughters were often written about. So that's kind of being depicted here in these more contemporary paintings, the labor that went into building the citadel juxtaposed with Christophe's opulent lifestyle. This is his famous palace at Sans-Souci. It was unfortunately crumbled by a magnitude 8.1 earthquake in May 1842, but in its heyday, it was considered also one of the crowning jewels and a crowning achievement. The first image there was painted by Numa de Roche, a young painter whom Christophe took under his wing and some said raised as alongside his children. Christophe had created an institute of art and had brought in British painters like Richard Evans to instruct those who were interested and capable in art, the arts of portraiture and landscapes. I just wanted to give you some more senses of the ruins of the palace at Sans-Souci, because while in some ways the citadel steals the show, the palace is quite magnificent even as it stands in ruins. These are his children. Christophe had two daughters, two surviving daughters, and the royal heir to his throne was Prince Victor Henri. He had an older child who died in Paris in 1805, and he also had at least one, but probably more, children outside of marriage. Prince Eugène, whom he made a noble in his court, was his, we think, oldest child. This is an image of a ball at Christophe's court, of course, more contemporary. And this is not actually Queen Marie-Louise, but some wrote that it was in the past. It's probably an homage to one of the muses to Christophe's love of theater. And these are just some of the more contemporary. This is a dress from the Christophian era, and then the artist Firle Baez, because we don't have any existing images of Marie-Louise, Christophe's wife and the Queen of Haiti, who has attempted to just give us some sense, an imaginative portrayal of the Queen. So like all good and bad things, Christophe's reign did eventually come to an end. In August 1820, he suffered a stroke at a church in Limonade, and while he was convalescing, a conspiracy formed in his absence, and in October of that same year, Christophe took his own life. So that's where I'm going to leave us. There's many things in between that, and I am looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And indeed, there is much more to talk about. Our first discussant this afternoon is Amy Wilentz, professor of English in the School of Humanities at the University of California at Irvine. She is the author of many books, including Farewell, Fred Voodoo, A Letter from Haiti, published in 2013, I Feel Earthquakes More Often Than They Happen, Coming to California in the Age of Schwarzenegger, 2006, The Rainy Season, Haiti Since Duvalier, 1990, and Martyrs Crossing, 2000. She's the recipient of the Whiting Writers Award, the Penn Martha Abrand Nonfiction Award, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Rosenthal Award, and the National Book Critics Circle Award for memoir. Her articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Politico, the London Review of Books, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and many other publications. She teaches in the literary journalism program as well at UC Irvine. A former Jerusalem bureau chief of the New Yorker magazine, she's a contributing editor at The Nation magazine and a 2020 Guggenheim Fellow. Amy, we're delighted that you could join us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Eric. A little late. So Marlene has given us a tour d'horizon of the life that she depicts in this incredible book. And I just want to say, to start off, an aside, talking about Christophe's carriages and all of the looks and the outfits and everything of his realm and of his palace, I was always reminded later on in my following of Haiti of Aristide's swimming pool. President Aristide, a rumored leftist, became president of Haiti recently compared to Christophe, and he built himself a swimming pool. And this was all like the international media had a breakdown. He has a swimming pool. Everybody in Haiti is starving. And I just thought of King Christophe and how you know, Haitian leaders are not allowed the trappings of power at all. And the concept is they should live like their people, which is not really possible. Anyway, it just always calls that to mind. So this book of Marlene Daut's really, really radiated for me as a writer who's worked so long in Haiti. It didn't just radiate and weigh on my mind because it's so enormous and heavy, both figuratively and literally, although it is, but because of the scope of its narrative and the depth of Daut's research and understanding, and also the breadth. She's always willing to look at some curious tangent in a way that I really love. It struck me all the way through the book that Christophe is a singular man, but also throughout that Haiti is a singular country. And it's a country whose history, especially during the period that most interests Daut in this book, the revolutionary years and just after, when Christophe was preeminent, it shows us so much about how the imperial world of Europe, with its incredible global reach and cruel trade, its violent economics and powerful militaries, deformed the modern world and constricted its potential, not just Haiti's potential, I mean, but global potential. The New World was really undermined by this behavior. This old world where slavery, which is to say a vast, unpaid, exploited labor force, was the coin of the realm, and thus profit margins enormous for the owners and for the imperiums they represented. That old world order had seemed invulnerable, and now here it was, cornered in the Caribbean, yet still fighting back like a mad dog. Finally, it was defeated, but its legacy, like the legacies of the American, French, and Haitian revolutions, lives on. This legacy is palpable on virtually every page of Marlene's fabulous history. Daut shows us a Haiti that was globalized before the idea of globalization came into being, and it was absolutely globalized. I've always felt that Haiti is exceptionally modern and predictive, and has been throughout its history. Let's not forget that it was founded by the colonials on a genocide of the indigenous peoples. Anyway, globalization. So the masters and plantation owners often lived abroad in their home countries. The overseers were often foreigners. The labor force was African or of African origin. The product generated was sent off island throughout the world by a trade network foreign to Haiti. Nothing was Haitian except finally the revolution and the revolutionaries, and then the state they created. So then it was almost impossible for the new country's leaders to re-enter that global market because of the infamous ransom France exacted for what they had lost in the Haitian Revolution, amounting to billions in today's dollars. And let's not forget the US banks that underwrote that criminally imposed debt. That was forgotten by the New York Times, but not by us around this table in this room on Zoom. To say nothing of the country's pariah status for being the world's first Black republic and for calling into question the basis of the economy of the rest of the world. Of course, Christophe is a figure of historic proportions who, had he not been a Black man and born a slave, would have had a biography like Marlene Daut's a century ago. I remember reading when I first started being interested in Haiti, I read a book called Written in Blood. This was a seemingly exhaustive study by Robert Heinel and his wife, Nancy Gordon Heinel. Heinel was the chief of the US naval mission to Haiti, which was a mission, stated baldly, to keep Haiti free from Soviet dominance and communism while it was under the dictatorship of Papa Doc Duvalier. For me, at the very beginning of my engagement, the Heinel book was a classic Bible. But as my years engaging with Haiti progressed, I recognized it also as a document of dominance, a piece of propaganda, and then way down the line, I realized that the leaders of Haiti's revolution in 1791 were scanted in the book, that they had left documents behind them, reams and reams of documents written and signed by them, official documents, professional documents, personal journals, letters. I remember seeing something by Toussaint in his hand, signed for the first time, and thinking, here, he speaks. Here's the man himself. Professor Daut has brought all of this to us in this amazing book of archival research, not just the protagonist, Christophe, but the dazzling coterie alongside whom he rose to power with their various voices, their defections, their rejoinings, their treachery, their flattery and intrigues, and also informing the long story of their brilliant revolution, their loyalty, their valor, and their heroism. This book is really an act of resurrection in which the dead speak from a long too silent corner of the world, and we discover they are the people who created our world. We see, admittedly, a lot of Napoleon too, who could not accept that the kind of world that had birthed him was coming to an end, and who was willing to inflict any kind of atrocity, including genocide, to keep things as they were. He and Christophe had a tortured relationship that Daut, I'm sorry, Marlene, I have said it that way in my head for too long, that Daut, both in moments of strained cooperation and then finally on opposite sides of the Haitian War, she outlines for us. Daut's book is so wonderful and real that even though one knows that Napoleon's tens of thousands of troops in Haiti, which were marshaled by General Leclerc, who she mentioned earlier, were eventually vanquished by Haitian forces, one can't help feeling oneself enter into the battle, rooting against Napoleon and hoping to see his defeat. Although you know the end of the story in many places, the details in the book keep you within the moment, and they help readers understand what really happened in Haiti during the revolution, the strategies, political concerns, meaningful rivalries, and the logic of actions that previously have been obscured by problematic narrators. I'm just going to talk about this, even though maybe it's a little long, but even just to get to Haiti from his birthplace in Grenada, Henri Christophe had to deal with the great powers of the globe in his era, France in particular. Daut starts the book by showing us how Christophe's fate intersected with that of the Comte d'Estaing, a French revolutionary general, revolutionary French Revolution, who fought the British in the American Revolution and then again in the Caribbean. She shows the differences in the records of the two men's births, Christophe's, as she said, barely recorded, and d'Estaing's laid out with parentage and genealogy and official stamps according to French noble tradition. She then shows us the bill of sale of the Count's small plantation in Haiti. This is how she operates in this book. It's so fabulous, where he was an absentee owner and all the buildings and animals and slaves he owned. Then she flips the switch to the histories of the people he enslaved, and she finds them runaways through wanted posters, arrest records, and descriptions of the brands of the d'Estaing plantation on their bodies for identification purposes. Christophe was not one of these, for he had been caught up in the history being made by the French Revolution and the American one too, and as Professor Daut told us just before, he ended up at the side of the Comte d'Estaing, fighting in the American Revolution on the side of the French and the Americans, and was 12 years old at the time. So you can imagine the trauma of this kid already as he gets to Haiti, and he ends up in Haiti. And the writer shows us the many twists of fate and character that brought him to the height of power. It tells you something tragic too, that the three leaders of the Haitian Revolution ended so badly. Toussaint Louverture, kidnapped from Haiti by a ruse of the French and a few Haitian Judases, and dead of starvation and neglect in a cold mountain prison in the Jura in France. Dessalines, assassinated, as we saw in that incredible painting, at the very beginning of Haitian independence. And Christophe, finally, a suicide himself in his incredible mountain redoubt, the Citadelle La Ferrière. This tragic and valiant history is what the book is all about. Along with Christophe's history, the book is about what Haiti was, is, and has become. And those are my interests too. Thank you for this book, Marion. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions of this writer. One is, because I'm a Haitianist and therefore a gossip, I wanted to ask this question. A side character in your book is a guy named Jean-Philippe Daut, spelled as your name is spelled. Perhaps no relation whatsoever. He was a general who appears at Christophe's side at about a dozen points in the book and makes a final appearance in its very last pages in a play about Christophe. I know Haiti and how you meet people all the time who tell you about their family relation to the great heroes of the revolution. Can you tell us, if it exists, about your relationship to this General Daut of the 18th century, who helped write the decree explaining to the population why Christophe was to become king of Haiti, and one of the few who remained with Christophe right to the end? during that massive desertion where everybody fled and who was therefore executed. I would like to know if you can tell me, if you have the documents to tell me what the relation is.
Well, first, thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I had chill. I really just appreciate everything you said. I'm going to be thinking on it and meditating on it for a while. Jean-Philippe Daut is
that's how I pronounce it.
Yes, and he is no relation of mine as far as I can be, as far as I'm aware or could conceive, because I'm Haitian on my mother's side, and my father traces his ancestry to distant German and Irish descent. So that would be some remarkable journey there. But I did learn a lot about Daut because even though my name is so unusual, it's not common, that even though he's no relation of mine, I couldn't help but to feel some kind of way about him being in the story. And on the one hand, I was, I guess, glad to see that he stayed by Christophe's side until the end. But then on the other hand, his end was so gruesome. Being executed the way that he was, and their bodies just thrown away like trash. I couldn't help but feel something. But I was happy when I found in the État civil of Haiti, his daughter's marriage certificate, like his family, they lived on, and so it was a small consolation, but I thought, okay, there they are. As you said, I liked to try to follow some of the people in this coterie who we don't know that much about, because they were all real people, but they just seem like names. And, when you read them, I wanted them to come to life. So thank you for asking that, even though I'm sorry to disappoint. Every Haitian asks me when I go to
so disappointed, because I thought that I could say, oh, he was a supporter of Christophe, so she is too. I thought I could question your objectivity, but I can't. Although I love that you went and looked for the daughter and found the marriage certificate. And that is so Marlene Daut, I have to say. Just going on and on. I bet you'll find in Germany some document where you'll discover that relation. The other question I had to ask for you was your impetus to write this in part to debunk all the racist junk that has been promulgated about Christophe? You talk in the book, mostly in the prologue, about the invented stories and the rumors generated by all sorts of people, white writers mostly, about silver bullets and bull's blood in the bricks and the bodies of workers being sort of carelessly thrown over the side of the citadel by the order of Henri Christophe. These stories that have taken on the status of truth in some histories of Christophe and in the minds, often I have seen, of foreign journalists. One of the most resonant sentences in the book, full of them, is this one: in suicide, King Henri could control his destiny, but not his legacy. So I wondered if you now have seemed to taken his legacy on as your task.
Yeah, it's so I love conversations like this because different things come to mind. And when you were mentioning that rumor that he just threw people, bodies out windows and things, and isn't it interesting then, in a bad way, that actually the person who threw the bodies and just left them on a dung heap, in one eyewitness's words, in multiple eyewitnesses' words actually, are Boyer's troops, are the very people who turned against Christophe, killed his teenage son and threw his body in a ditch, killed the Baron de Vastey and threw his body in a ditch, killed Jean-Philippe Daut, killed Prince Eugène, and that all of the things that they said that he did, they did. And in fact, Demise in his posthumously published book, 1842 Au Cap, he says that Jean-Pierre Boyer was more of a king than even Louis-Philippe of France, who's the one who made Haiti, of course, for those who don't know, signed the 1838 indemnity agreement, which reduced the amount, that he was more of a king, even though he had the title of president, than any other ruler, which was to say he was more of a dictator, more of an absolutist. And so I found it very interesting that in the zeal to try to paint Christophe as the worst monster ever, that so many people invented all these stories when he really had flaws. We can find what they were. We don't have to invent stories about him. At the end of the book, because I wanted to be true to the people who also lived there, not just the nobles and his family members, I talk about a pretty credible account where someone says, I remember the people he worked really hard. They were women and they walked with bricks up to the citadel, and sometimes they didn't have water and they died or they collapsed, and the king was having parties. But they weren't sensational stories. He said, someone was accused of insubordination, he sent him up to the prison, and once you went up to prison, you never came out, right? That to get to an idea of Christophe as this imperfect, sometimes violent ruler, it wasn't necessary to create all of this lore. And I think that it is really racism that caused so many writers in his era and beyond to create the most fabulated tales possible. And in fact, when people say things about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington being men of their time, Haitian rulers never get to be men of their time.
Right.
Christophe was compared to Caligula, which suggests to me that people very well understand how to judge the past. If this is the worst person you could think of, and then you compare Christophe to him. In 1942, there's an article about Christophe called Black Hitler. I mean, that people definitely always judge the past, they judge the present, and yet these rulers are always held to a very different standard, I find. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to set the record straight, so to speak, which is to get us on the right path to really understanding him, not to defend him, not to apologize for him, but I wanted to know him. And so that's what I set out to do.
Well, one thing I think about the book is from now on, writers and journalists are going to be held to this standard of documentation. They have to look at your book, and it has a very thorough index, may I add, a help to all journalists everywhere who never read books, unless forced to by their friendship and their interest. And I think that's great. I have one more question, but I can put it on hold, or may I ask?
You may ask.
I may ask. I wanted you to talk a little bit about how the research involved in the book has made you think about two long-lived accepted truths in foreign media about Haiti. That is, that it is self-destructive and that it is ungovernable and that they don't know how to govern themselves in Haiti. Why have these stereotypes persisted, and how do you interpret them? Explain why Christophe, if you can at the same time, just briefly, and his supporters thought it was a good idea, after all that went before the battle for liberty, to declare himself a king. So I think it's two things that are intertwined. Why does he want to be king, and why does everybody say Haiti can't be ruled?
Well, and I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The Haiti can't be ruled, because what did the United States do when Dessalines was emperor? Was institute a trade embargo, which I talk about in the book, led to grain shortages and flour shortages. And I mean, this put pressure on the government. Christophe, of course, then inherited that legacy. But then you also have Napoleon over here scheming. There's rumors with André Rigaud that he's sending him. It is quite curious that André Rigaud just suddenly shows back up after having been essentially detained in France and lived in exile for 7 years or so. And so on the one hand, you have the world powers kind of scheming against Haiti. The Bourbon, each time Louis XVIII is restored to the throne, he starts scheming. He remains scheming even when Boyer has control over the whole island. And then, of course, his brother Charles X, Charles X, forces Boyer's hand. And so the idea that Haiti and Haitians can't govern themselves is an orchestration, and it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because even before that, when one of Toussaint Louverture's children wanted to go back to Haiti and asked the French government if he could, their machinations behind the scenes are like, oh no, let's like use him against Boyer. Let's try to create some dissension. Let's see what we can do there. That there was always this scheming. And when they found out that Boyer had reunited the eastern and western sides of the island, the whole island, they were like, oh, maybe we can try to use this and get the Easterners to be upset. I mean, they clearly knew that the island could be governed, was being governed, and did essentially everything, without being hyperbolic, possible to prevent it from flourishing. Once they knew they couldn't reinstate slavery, they cooked up the scheme to put Haiti into debt. And regardless of one's feelings about Boyer signing that agreement, it's still exactly what happened.
Right. I thank you for that response, because it is like the revolutionary period's response to what is happening now in Haiti. Okay, I am finished.
Amy, thank you so much. Before we move on, let me remind those in the audience that if you have a question, we'd like to hear it. And the preferred way is for you to use the raise hand function in Zoom. That way you unmute, I call on you, you unmute, you pose the question yourself. You can also use the Q&A function. We've got a few questions there already, in which case you write them out and I get to read them. So feel free to use the raise hand function and we'll call on you. Okay, our second discussant this afternoon is Laurent Dubois, who is the John L. Now III Bicentennial Professor in the History and Principles of Democracy at the University of Virginia. Among his books are A Colony of Citizens, Revolution and Slave Emancipation in the French Caribbean, 1787 to 1804, published in 2004, a book that won the Frederick Douglass Prize and 3 other prizes. Haiti, The Aftershocks of History, published in 2012, a book that I read in my historian's book group. Soccer Empire, The World Cup and the Future of France, 2010, The Language of the Game, How to Understand Soccer, 2018, and The Banjo, America's African Instrument, published in 2016. His writings on music, history, and sports have appeared in The Atlantic, The Nation, The New Republic, The New Yorker, The New York Times, Slate, and Sports Illustrated. Laurent, welcome back to the Washington History Seminar. We're glad you're here.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, Christian, and all the folks at the Wilson Center for having this. I'm really honored to be part of it. And Amy, thank you for those amazing comments. Always a pleasure to be in dialogue with you. Marlene and I have been kind of in conversation about this book for a long time as historians. And we recently, in fact, were on a panel together at the American Historical Association talking around the questions of biography. So there's a nice little continuity and connection there. So it's wonderful to be here today. I really wanted to highlight kind of 3 major questions, and I hope we can kind of dialogue around them. The first was actually, I kept thinking in returning to the book now about the connection with Awakening the Ashes, your other recent book, which is also about to receive the Frederick Douglass Prize in a few weeks. In the sense that in that book, you kind of highlighted the ways in which almost the writing of Haitian history kind of propelled 19th century thinkers in Haiti to kind of innovate in certain ways, right? To find different ways to tell history because of the particulars of the situation, many particulars, including facing like a very hostile kind of world that was trying to write their story for them and wanting to find new ways. And so you argue in that book that they were kind of pioneering in a number of ways. And the main thing I just wanted to say first to kind of complement the work, it feels like in this book, it's almost like you put into action what you were describing in the other book, in which I think you've kind of innovated around the form of biography in a really interesting way, in the way that you sort of welcome the reader into the difficulty of telling the story. You welcome them into the uncertainty, right? Into the possibility of several different possibilities around certain things. So you kind of have a way of both inviting people into the discursive complexity of this life, and at the same time, without giving up on, you don't then kind of give up on the idea of narrating, and giving people a life. So there are moments, I think, where you're very certain, or at least you're as certain as one can be. You say, this is really what I think, happened. And there's other cases where you kind of accept that uncertainty. And I think, again, we discussed this a little bit at the American Historical Association meetings, but there's a particular challenge of writing biography that is part of the struggle to kind of it's interesting in the case of the Haitian Revolution, because I also often think about what's unique about the Haitian Revolution within the broader history of slavery in the Americas, is that in so many cases, right, we, as many people have talked about, there's these deep silences, right, that Michel Rolfe-Drouot wrote about. In the history of most most political action by the enslaved, you really only have kind of trial documents or hostile records, right, or maybe sometimes interrogations. The Haitian Revolution, because it succeeds, enables people to then move into another place where they produce their own documents, right? And so you do have here this interesting counterpoint between the early life, which is sort of shaped by silences, and then a later life in which, like, Christophe literally has a press, literally has the ability to generate his own archive, right? And that, I think, is really interesting. And on page 57, sort of early on, you talk about this kind of tension, right? The ways in which Black life in Saint-Domingue was kind of devalued to such point that they were kind of rendered silent in a certain way. But then your refusal to kind of just accept that silence, right? And to bring to life these things. So I just wanted to, this is really sort of following on Amy's point as well, that there's a kind of resurrection here as well, but it reminded me of the way that you described the early 19th century Haitian writers. And so I don't know if when you were writing, these books, Awakening the Ashes and this one, did you feel like you were in some ways writing kind of in the tradition of the Haitian historiography that you sort of had analyzed in your other work? Are you writing in the tradition of Vastey and others? And I just was thinking about that as reading that. Is that something that you would call upon, or maybe you're innovating in different ways?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's really, that phrasing of refusal to accept the silence, because I think that it just resonated with me so much, because I think there's a way in which it's tempting to just say, oh, well, we don't have official, a baptismal, we don't have these things, so we can't know. And I guess to get to the second part of the question, to write in the tradition, I'm not sure if I felt that I was writing in the tradition, but I felt that it would be a form of further silencing to say, Henri Christophe had his own press, wanted his life to be recorded, told his story to someone who could record it and spread it, but then to just say, no, that's not the baptismal certificate, so we can't know. And I'm very interested in that form of dismissal, and that I found is a part and parcel of the silencing of the revolution, because when I first came to study this, of course, as you know, I'm working on the Baron de Vastey, who was called by eminent historians a propagandist, next to like voluminous citations of Moreau de Saint-Méry, which is like, gives me whiplash. Like Moreau de Saint-Méry is a French colonist from Martinique. He's a jurist. He's part of the government. He's an ardent racist. And yet I'm to take his word about what's happening in the colony. But Baron de Vastey, who came from a white family, his mother was a free woman of color, light enough to pass for white, who was legitimately married to his father, Jean Vastey, who had immigrated there from Normandy to the colony. And his mother makes them wealthy because her father was one of the wealthiest planters in Marmelade in that area. And Baron de Vastey turns his back on all of that during the Leclerc expedition when he realizes they're trying to kill him too because he's a person of color. And so to me, it was very interesting that because he goes and works for this king, that therefore nothing he says can be accepted. And so pretty early on, I did, because I'd read so much of his writings, recognize that his way of dealing with that was to say, of course I have a point of view. I'm Haitian. I'm going to write with my Haitian pen, but you're writing with your French pen, and you're writing with your American pen, and you're writing with your British pen. And that he pointed out that all of those who had written Haitian history before him had done so with a spirit of bias, that they were hiding under the idea that they were the only ones who could faithfully tell the story. And so he takes them on. And so what I really, if I feel some affinity with that kind of tradition, is to say it is okay, normal, and inevitable to have a point of view. That as a writer, you cannot say I'm objective, even though I tried to not judge Christophe. When I think I had this conversation at one point with Amy, like when he wants to tile his wall in gold quads from Spain. And I'm like, really? In my head? But I'm going to
Really
just
necessary, yes.
to tell the reader about this because I trust that the reader will. I don't need to tell the reader that this is like a waste of money. Like that's pretty obvious. So it wasn't from a place of objectivity. It was just I didn't want to interfere, but I also told the reader early on, sometimes I have to tell you who people are and where they're writing from. And that is really a part of the Haitian intellectual tradition. Like this guy is Louis Dubois. He works for Napoleon. He was sent here to write this. So if he's writing a history of Dessalines or he's writing about Toussaint, can you really trust it? And that's the point of view that Vastey operated with Malouet, with so many of the other French colonists who wrote story.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it leads to my second question a little bit in the sense that what I sometimes feel like what we need for Haitian history, this will sound a little bit more strange, is like a more banal reading of things, right? So in other words, like for Haitian rulers to be understood as, political actors in the 18th and early 19th century, like other political actors in that period, who consolidated power in certain ways and formed states in certain ways, and for whom the performance of power was important and a crucial part of statecraft, et cetera, right? And there's a way in which, and I was really, I was fascinated in the part King is Crowned in the chapter, you talk about the moment where they decide to create a kingdom. Right. And, true to form in a kind of good way, they use Montesquieu, which kind of lots of people refer to all the time. I mean, who was kind of the reigning political thinker in a lot of ways for thinkers, the American founders and others as well, who did make a pretty strong argument that in many cases, a certain kind of kingdom was maybe the best structure or the most sort of stable structure for certain orders, as long as the sovereign had a certain kind of respect for the rights of people, et cetera, right? And so it's just interesting to see them, and they kind of say specifically, like, we took note of Montesquieu's argument about the benefits of, and it continues in other parts of that chapter. But I was curious, of course, creating a kingdom, in Haiti was like in some ways somewhat similar to creating a kingdom elsewhere, but also totally different, right? And there's this kind of remarkable experimentation in political history here, where you have, a place where the majority of people are African born, who have just overthrown slavery, who have just created, kind of independent country, and then this decision to sort of craft a kingdom for, I think, very specific reasons, right? And a kingdom that brings together an incredibly wide variety of people in its ranks, right? So the nobles that he kind of brings around him, some are African born, some are white, and like there's this kind of real variation, right? And a kind of coalition made out of that. But I was curious, and then obviously, as you well know, there's always been a kind of conversation also about the kind of royalism in African contexts and how it may or may not have shaped thinking in Haiti, right? So you obviously have people for whom kingdoms exist in Central Africa. Maybe they have different modalities of what that means, and he's speaking to a population for whom that, and I think he knows that, for him. So just kind of curious, like, I guess the way to put this question is, I think you're teaching us something here about where we could put Henri Christophe just in a broader political history, right? In the history of state formation and forms of states and what they can do and what they can't do. And is there a way to just what would you sort of say to people, I guess, quickly about how the book helps you sort of do that, or what you would want to say about that political history?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you get into their justifications for this, the counselors of state, they write this document to explain to the public why they needed this change in governance. And one of the things, in addition to Montesquieu and also Rousseau, who did say that you could have a king if you had a very small area to reign over and it wasn't hereditary, right? Because you just can't force your children to accept the person that you chose, right? So he's breaking with that. He does have a hereditary kingdom. But the other thing they talk about is, look at Napoleon. France tried to have a republic and Napoleon republics are not places where Black people are free from slavery, because look at Napoleon, and then also they can be overthrown, and look at the United States. And so they have to be very careful when they talk about the United States, because they don't want the United States to issue another trade embargo. They also hope that one day the United States is going to formally recognize their independence. But they're like, that form of governance might suit them very well, but it doesn't work for us. But I think that another thing that's really important about this monarchy is that it is a constitutional monarchy. It does have a council of state. It does have laws. It does have a court. It does have, it's not necessarily always functioning in that way. Onlookers said, for example, Victor Henri's teacher, who was in Haiti at the time of the king's suicide, said, you know, Henri Christophe's problem was that he made great laws, but he was the first to break them. And he was also a philosopher. Like this society was
very dangerous. Yeah.
And that when you look at how Joseph Banks and Thomas Clarkson and William Wilberforce and Prince Saunders praised this society, you can see that on paper, if he could have brought this to fruition, it would have been great.
Yeah, I mean, the Code Henri is an amazing document, right? I mean, down to very, very specific kind of regulations around land use and, all this kind of, you can see, right, that there's a kind of question around agriculture and, of course, the schooling system and all these sorts of projects, right, that, didn't have a long time to come to flourishing and so forth. But yeah, that's really, really important. I think it's interesting to think in that way. I think, the another part of this that I wanted to highlight, that you do bring together this kind of cultural history, this kind of remarkable cultural history that's flourishing in this place, right? The kind of thing there really should be a series about or a film about. I hope that you'll, for people who are fans of, sort of elaborate dances in evenings in palaces, like we've got one for you. And but I think that that kind of cultural history is really interesting. And I wonder, and it does feel like also part of this challenge, right? Which is like the challenge that lots of revolutions have, which is like, how do you constitute a people? How do you create a kind of sense of national identity in the midst of, division and literal kind of complexity of language and culture in the case of Haiti, right? So all these questions that, again, all these states faced at the time. I wonder if you can talk a little more, or maybe just share like your favorite tidbits that you found about the cultural history, because I think that what they're doing with culture is obviously also about trying to kind of unite or at least kind of create some sort of sense of identity. And in that sense, it's interesting how they're very, very much, of course, referencing and drawing on theater and dance from Europe and laying claim to that. And I often think of it not that they're imitating, but that they consider it part of their heritage, right? That they just sort of think of it as part of what that they have, and in terms of the theater and other things. But then, of course, there is this kind of interesting incorporation of other elements, right, or reflections of the Haitian context too. So I don't know if you can share just a little bit about that, because I think it's a really fascinating part of the book for those who are interested in just the history of culture more globally.
Yeah, so I would say it is, I know it's kind of a true creolization, because, okay, on the one hand, the carriages, these famous, infamous carriages, so they weren't just British carriages. In fact, the British commented that they were constructed in a particular way that hadn't been done before, but to block the sun. And of course, because like in London, you wouldn't need a carriage that blocked the sun in this way, but in Haiti you do. And so when they wrote about it in the newspapers, that's what they commented on. So on the one hand, you have this admiration for these kind of British carriages, which I talk about another moment earlier in Christophe's life where he sees a magnificent carriage, and just to give some sense of, he saw finer things as a young man and perhaps wanted those things as well once he was older. But then there is also the nod to Africa. For example, Christophe's royal guards are called the Royal Dahomey. His wife's body of kind of female guards is called les Amazones. And, based on their understandings, which are imperfect, of these regions and these traditions, to be clear. But also you'll find Baron de Vastey talking about, Egypt and kings in Africa as well as kings in other parts of the world. And they talk about emperors, they talk about Rome. They have a pretty broad understanding that seeps into the culture in multiple ways, because when you read plays by Just Chanlat or operas by Just Chanlat, you will see that it's got some songs that were in an opera by Rousseau or some verse that's in an opera by Voltaire, but then it's a complete refashioning of it.
Right.
And the other thing is Christophe's ability to articulate and formulate why the Haitian Revolution needed monuments. That he talked about inscribing the names of those who wrote the Declaration of Independence, who signed it, the revolutionaries, because he was very afraid that the history was going to be forgotten because it was being rewritten before his eyes, because they would get these documents from around the world and they would say, you see how they're talking about us as brigands? Do you see how they're talking about us as heathens? So I would say, to me, that was the most special thing, is that how much they knew that if they didn't tell the story, someone else would, and it wouldn't be good for them.
That's great, especially since early on you also talk about the more recent monument that was built, by the Haitian community in Charleston, right, to remind people of the role that soldiers from Saint-Domingue played, including Christophe in the American Revolution. It makes me think too of our colleague Ada Ferrer's book on Aponte during the same period, but the challenge of how to imagine a kind of state in this kind of creolized African European world that would broadcast outward, and also kind of do a certain kind of work inward. It's just totally fascinating. So I really hope that people will, certainly refer to this book and think about just how this is a crucial moment in just kind of the broader political and cultural history of the world, right? And deserves to just sort of have its place there. So with gratitude for the contribution you've made, I think I'll stop there. I know there's a lot of questions already accumulating and probably many people eager to dialogue with you. So thank you for having me as part of this conversation.
So much. Thank you both.
Thank you, Laurent. So we have a number of people who have their hands up, and I am going to ask Dane Kennedy to unmute and to pose a question, and for Martin Felix to be on standby.
Okay. Can you hear me? I guess you can.
Yes, we can, Dane.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was such a fascinating conversation, and it's clear that this book really is an exciting recovery of a silenced history. My question, insofar as it is a question, I suppose it goes on from some of the remarks that Laurent made, and it has to do in particular with the broader context and implications of the story that you tell, in terms of state building, nation building, the role of sovereignty in a moment of what at that time was called revolution, what we might also call decolonization, since there's so many parallels here between the Haitian experience and the experience that occurs in the mid 20th century. But and I'd be happy to have you sort of comment on any of those themes in terms of the larger implications of your story. But in more particularly, I'm intrigued by what sort of transnational impact or reputation Christophe had. I mean, we have a sense of his reputation in your recounting of the book, his reputation among Europeans, which obviously wasn't good. But what about his reputation among people of color, among colonized people? Do we have any sense of whether his project resonated with them? And in that context, just briefly, it strikes me that there's an interesting parallel here to the reputation that Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia had in the 1930s as a kind of model for Black liberation. I mean, his influence on the Rastafarians and the like. And I'm just wondering, was there anything like that which took place in the story that you tell? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I should say that during Christophe's life, his reputation, it was so dependent on place and context because the British abolitionists loved him. And in fact, after his death, Thomas Clarkson wrote this letter to American clergy in which he said, "You never had anyone half as great as Christophe among all of your presidents and previous heads of state. So let's just get that clear, because Christophe was anti-slavery and none of the US presidents were in so far as they were willing to abolish it as Christophe did." And so the abolitionists absolutely loved him. The Northern US press wrote about him in often very flattering ways, and especially his ministers. But after his death, because his enemies get to kind of paper the earth with the story, we start to see a real turn in how Christophe's going to end up being portrayed. But to the second part of the question, so African-American writers in the United States in the period of the Harlem Renaissance loved portraying Christophe on the stage. William Edgar Easton had a play. Henrietta Vinton Davis plays like an avenging priestess. It's actually pretty magnificent, except that Christophe is demonized, which is the part of this, is that there was I don't want to say obsession, there was a fascination with him. But that it didn't mean that then the portrait was going to be flattering or even accurate. And so, Orson Welles gets his hands on the story and has an all-black cast in what's nicknamed Voodoo Macbeth, but is largely drawn, Orson Welles said, from the life of Christophe. And then other actors like Paul Robeson and others in the era are very fascinated by this. The Emperor Jones is believed to be based on Christophe and Dessalines' story kind of merged together, and possibly also Toussaint Louverture. And then closer towards the middle of the century, we get Aimé Césaire and Derek Walcott, and even as an ancillary figure, C.L.R. James and Edouard Glissant later, they're portraying Christophe's life, but their sources are going to be a lot of the British travelers who wrote about Christophe in very demonic, they would have painted him as a demonic tyrant. And so these are their sources. And so even in potentially, lacing it with their fascination, Christophe emerges as this tragic figure, a tyrant, a despot, and really not human-like. And I would say the person who most kind of spread this non-human-like version of Christophe was Alejo Carpentier in his famous 1949 book, originally published in Spanish, In the Kingdom of This World, which has been translated into Russian and German and all these languages. So it's really spread across the world to the point where a lot of people kind of, at least to my mind, confuse fiction for history and read that text as if it is an actual guide to who Christophe was. So it's a double-edged sword, that sort of fascination that means that more people knew about him, especially in earlier periods, but they didn't really know him.
Thank you very much. Nicholas Shelley has a hand up. Martin Felix's hand went down. So Nicholas, if you would unmute and join the conversation.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Shelley. I'm a graduate student at UNCW. And I was wondering if I had a cultural question. I was wondering if King Henri's court if the fashion of it was more modeled after like the pre-revolution like French Rococo style, or the post-revolutionary like neoclassical style, and if the fashion kind of informed politics or vice versa there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's an interesting question. Most of the dresses that they ordered, for example, for the princesses came from England. So I would say they were more in the Georgian style. And I think you can see that reflected in the one dress that we have there, but also in the way that the British press wrote about their dresses. The soldiers, I mean, they were definitely in the high military. They were influenced by the French style when you look at the dress of the soldiers, and that's because that's what they came from. But most of the materials came from England. But I'm not a material historian, but I'm told that some of the colors that they were using, some art historians told me, they can date the period of the fabric based on what colors were available and the kinds of dyes that they were using. And some of it was pretty original. We have a painting from 1823, for example, painted by the French painter Rhône, who also painted Boyer's kind of inauguration, that reveals some of all of this color that's described in the newspapers. So I would say, even though that's not my period, the fashion of the period, that I would say, as far as the female dresses, my understanding is they were more Georgian because they came from Georgian England. That's where they were purchased. And that the military uniforms did reflect more of what you would have seen in the French army of the time period. So not a full answer to your question, but you probably know more about the fashion than I do.
Thank you. Martin Felix's hand is back up. Martin, please unmute.
Hi, yes, I think it was a mistake that it was down, but thank you, appreciate it. Yeah, this is quite a fascinating session. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry that I'm a bit late. I had a class that ended just after you started, but I just wanted to ask about Christophe's connection to Grenada and also the chronology of his his presence there and his age and that kind of thing. I know that in Grenada there was a major revolution, almost of the scale of the French Revolution, the Fedon Rebellion of 1795, 1796. It lasted for over a year and was only defeated by invasion from the surrounding areas. At that time, Grenada was a French colony, as Haiti was before the revolution, and Martinique, Guadeloupe, Dominica, Saint Lucia, they were all French colonies from one period to another. It was a musical chair contest, particularly in the Les Antilles, between the British and the French for possession of these islands. And I'm wondering about whether Fedon, him being born in 1767 and the revolution 1795, whether there were any contacts between him and the revolutionaries of his birthplace. There was this book by Julius Scott, Common Wind, and he talks about the Afro-American crossroads, currents, sorry, of the Haitian Revolution, meaning the contacts that existed between the various Caribbean territories, revolutionary ideas and revolutionary strategy and tactics and that kind of thing, and also, in terms of his age, it is said that Fedon was born in 1767, but yet in 1779 he was fighting in the siege of Savannah. And I've always wondered about the accuracy of this kind of this dating, well, of his birth, because then he would have been 12 years old. I know that people were matured very quickly because of the crucible of slavery and all of that. So I just wanted to see whether there was any kind of clarification on that, or whether you touched on that in the earlier part of the session or in the book. And some sources say he was Grenadian, others say that he was Haitian, born in St. Kitts. Just these questions.
Thank you very, very much. Marlene?
Yes, so yeah, I addressed the issue of his birth date, and in the book I do as well. So yes, the correct birthday is October 1767. He was born on the island of Grenada, which was in British hands, had been in French hands before that. We'll go back to French hands, but then pretty quickly turn back into British hands, actually. And so Christophe is most likely, the trajectory that I trace in the book is the siege of Grenada, which is also led by the Comtesse Saint, happens just before the siege at Savannah. And D'Estaing takes a number of prisoners, including some of them children or adolescents, as Christophe was, and takes them with him first to Cap Français to gather the chasseurs volontaires, and then they go on to the North American campaign. And the documents that created the chasseurs volontaires allowed for boys who were 12 years old to be either trumpeters or drummers. So that is the reason that the Haitian American Historical Society portrays Christophe as a drummer on that monument. But actually what I show as I follow, I really wanted to trace the story of the Battle of Savannah, not just because I was looking for Christophe and all this voluminous documentation that the French produced about like every war that they were ever in, but also because I wanted to understand, well, what would his life have been like if he was there and doing this? And the chasseurs volontaires were digging trenches. So that was definitely something that someone his age could do. And I also talk about how on one of those nights when they're digging these trenches, they are attacked by the British, and many of them are wounded. So on his 12th birthday, actually, because his birthday would have been about 3 days before the big siege on October 9th, he was either wounded, probably in the hospital, or out there in those ditches digging the trenches still, as there was a great amount of secrecy needed to carry out D'Estaing's operation. So none of the sources I read talked about any drumming, and so I don't think that they would have been doing that. D'Estaing was very secretive and often wrote in code, and the reason that the siege failed was because it was supposed to be a surprise attack, and the British were not surprised. The French and the Americans had been betrayed. And they knew that it was coming. And so when the false attack happened, they knew that it wasn't the signal for the real one. So that's what I would say about that. But definitely I address all of the discrepancies, the people who say he's born here and there, and I talk about why it's not correct.
Thank you. Marie Nadine Pierre, please unmute, pose your question.
Hi, I just want to know what happened to members of his kingdom and the court if they had to disperse. The ones that were not killed by Boye's troops, did they have to leave the Great North?
Oh, yes. So, no, the ones who were not killed, well, Juste Charlotte, principally, who was the Comte de Rosier, stays and works under Boyer. He worked for previously Dessalines, then Christophe, then Boyer. So he has this kind of uncommon trajectory of that. Julien Prévost, he lives until about 1823 or so, and he he stays in the North. He runs a newspaper that's published in the North that engages in much Christophe slander or defamation. And so, no, it depended. Paul Romain, he initially escapes execution, then he is charged with sedition, so he's sent up to the prison. He's there for a couple years, and then he tries to escape, and they capture him and they kill him. So it just depended on the particular moment, because Boyer's defense of the days after Christophe's death, the kind of 10 days after, is that he told his troops not to execute the royal prince and Vate and the others, and that his directive came too late. And this is really, he's kind of doing damage control, because even those who don't like Christophe are really, they're thinking about this child, this teenage boy being killed, and they have to live with his mother. But the royal family, they are moved down to Port-au-Prince, they're detained, and Boyer is eventually going to let them leave. They go to England and then to Italy. So I kind of traced their trajectory. So it really, really depended. But Jean-Philippe Daut's daughter, she gets married to one of Dessalines' children, and Marie-Claire Heureuse, she stays there. The other Dessalines children do as well. So no, they don't have to flee, but I suspect that they were probably under some forms of surveillance and told to serve the state. And they had examples of people like Romain who didn't, and so they would have known what would happen to them if they decided to rebel.
Thank you. Mike Lefwich, please unmute. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes. Go ahead.
Can you all see me?
Yes. We
Oh,
can hear
hey,
you.
how are you? I just wanted to let you guys know, thank you for the invite. This is a very wonderful for me to see. I am Haitian myself. My father's Haitian. My mom's from here, and I want to thank you guys for the information that has been bestowed upon us. I've been, researching us for, I want to say, about the last 6, 7 years now, tied deeply into the Haiti culture and also other cultures as well. So I just want to tell you guys and ladies, thank you for this knowledge that's been given to us. And I'm about to finish working. I came on exactly at 4 with you all. So I just wanted to tell you guys, thank you. I wrote down some information. I know that this is recorded too, so I just took a few pictures as well, but I just want to say thank you for the invite and for the information that's been bestowed upon us, because this is very valuable information. One thing I wanted to add as well was the iridium also that is there in Haiti, where also, it's this piece of elemental, or some people in Haiti call it the extraterrestrial type of element, and this thing where it gravitates, and they use the military and so many people use it for so much stuff. So I do know that's probably one of the main reasons to why is so much disaster over there that's been going on for a while. But if you guys pull up Iridium, and there's a woman who's from Haiti as well, who's actually talk about that. And it's a documentary about that. So I think it's like a 2-hour documentary. I haven't watched it, but I've seen some clips of it. Seems very great. But thank you all for everything. Like I said, I'm a little shy, but it's beautiful to be a part of this. And
thank you very much. I am going to use co-chair's prerogative to pose a question myself. We've talked a lot about an individual today, since this is a biography, but biographers also write about times and not just people. And I'm going to use something that you say in your prologue to kind of invite you to expand more from what's in the book about the subject. And toward the end of the prologue, you write about France trying repeatedly to restore Saint-Domingue, which meant reinstating slavery and colonialism. You continue, Christophe insisted that every one of his labor reforms and all of his laws, along with every single structure he built, were meant to ensure that his country would never again fall under the yoke of French domination. King Henri's laws adamantly forbade chattel slavery, outlawed colonialism, and created an economically robust, financially solvent black state, not one dependent upon the transatlantic slave trade, end quote. Could you just say a few words about the project? If one is ruler, one has a vision. And so if you could shift from the personal to kind of the socioeconomic and political dimensions of King Henri and what he tried to and indeed did accomplish.
Yes, I mean, his vision was vast. He was trying to create a national school system for girls and boys at a time when that was not common at all. He again had the British abolitionists, Wilberforce and Clarkson, and Prince Saunders from the United States aiding him in this. And his vision also was for Haitians to, yes, be strong in their exports. Their main export was coffee. Their greatest trading partner was Great Britain. But he told them and issued decrees, we've got to build and plant subsistence crops, wheat, grains, potatoes, all kinds of things, because we cannot be beholden to foreigners because they had experience with trade embargoes before, and that led to food shortages. His vision also extended to essentially reassigning the former plantations owned by the ex-colonists to the Haitian populace. Now, of course, this is a highly military and hierarchical society of royalty. So those are going to go to nobles, those leases, and to high-ranking military officers. And it wasn't actually until near the end of his reign, around 1818 or so, that he starts to understand that things are a little bit too unequal, because he does have to deal with revolts and rebellions from time to time in his realm. So he makes laws that extend who can capture these leases and who can run them. And he also started doing things on his yearly kind of tours that he would take around the kingdom to talk to the people, because his vision was also very paternalistic. I'm the father, you're the children, I'm taking care of you, but you have to trust me and listen to me and obey me. And he would give the farmers money. And especially if they'd had a really good crop that year, he would give them bonuses, and he would say, distribute it all around to the people. So again, he had these ideas about what would make Haiti prosper, and that involved having robust economic system that involved imports and exports, so Haiti would not be a dependent nation. But it also involved shoring up the military, building the citadel, creating an army that's tens of thousands strong. It involved an education system for boys and girls, and it involved bringing foreigners to the kingdom to teach them. It involved changing the religion of Haiti from Catholicism to Anglicanism, sort of. He might have just been telling Wilberforce that to make him happy. He does have a priest near him when he has his stroke, so it wasn't complete. He talks about changing the language from French to English, that he has an idea, to go back to an earlier point, of decolonization that involves getting rid of many vestiges of French rule, which he likens to Catholicism, dependency, food dependency. Baron de Vastey criticizes the French colonists and the French metropole for making the colony dependent on France for everyday foodstuffs, that this is a measure of control. So he does have a philosophical vision, but he also has the material means to carry it out. But he also furthers that carceral system that existed in the colonial era. And the citadel is a massive prison. Its primary function under Dessalines is a prison. Christophe expands it to make it vast like a city under his rule, but it's still a prison. And so some of his vision is, attempts to break with the past, but some, repeats it to a certain extent. So that's what I would say from that standpoint. And the last thing I would say is keeping the Western powers at bay. He issues a trade embargo against France at one point when they keep trying to, under the Bourbons, quote unquote, restore the colony. He issues his own trade embargo. So he always wants to negotiate from a position of power, and he will not respond to any missive that calls him General Christophe rather than King Henry as a result.
Thank you very much. I am afraid I need to draw this to a close. My eye is on the clock, and it is now 5:30. We could go on for much, much longer, I am sure. But I do want to thank Marlene, Amy, Laurent, and Christian for this session this afternoon, and to those of you in the audience. And final words go to Christian. Zoom screen, back to you, sir.
Thank you. My thanks as well to Marlene, Amy, Laurent, and of course, Eric, for really rich discussion this afternoon. I invite you all to join us next Monday, February 3rd, for Hotel Lux, an intimate history of communism's forgotten radicals. As always, 4 p.m. Eastern. Until then, stay safe. Take care. We're adjourned.